Hey guys, Zaku Otaku here, and I wanted to share some really exciting news with you guys. As you may have heard on Monday, Netflix announced that they would be adapting Gundam into a live-action movie, which is pretty exciting given that I only just started getting into the Gundam franchise, and already there's going to be a live-action adaptation. I feel like the timing couldn't be any better. So I found out some details, and I'd like to share some of them with you today. It's pretty interesting the kind of people that they've got on board for this film, and I'm quite optimistic as to how they're gonna make this film and what it's gonna look like. So the director has been announced to be Vogt-Roberts, who you might have heard was the director of Kong Skull Island, which personally has been my favorite of the MonsterVerse movies. It had this really fun, campy kind of tone to it. There were a lot of visual references to existing anime, especially Neon Genesis Evangelion, and the director has openly said that he drew a lot of inspiration from previous mecha series for the visual ideas in Skull Island. And I think that really shines through. I'm not saying that every fan of mecha anime will inherently be a good director for a live-action mecha movie, but at least the guy knows something about mecha, so he will probably be able to take some of this information and use it in his adaptation. The writer announced for this Gundam adaptation movie is Brian K. Vaughan, who's actually one of my favorite comic book writers. He's responsible for comics such as Y the Last Man, Ex Machina, and also Runaways, all of which are fantastic comic books, and if you haven't read them already, you definitely should check them out. The producer of this film was announced to be Kale Boyter, who was responsible for Detective Pikachu, which in my opinion is probably the best live-action adaptation of a video game to date. I think that if these guys were involved in the production of any animated series adapted into live action, I'd probably be pretty excited. So it's cool to see that something that I've only just started getting into is now going to be turned into live action with some really creative people at the helm. I've heard a lot of speculation that this is going to be a complete remake of the original 1979 Gundam anime from the Universal Century. And while I think that would be a really great idea, I don't think it's going to be an exact one-to-one remake. I believe that they're going to change the setting, but keep it in the same universe, or change the characters, but make it a similar story, or maybe just keep the original Gundam, but change enough that it's not exactly UC. And the reason I believe this is because the people involved in the production of this film have generally created their own stories within the universes of the franchises they're adapting. The director, Jordan Vogt-Roberts, who directed Kong Skull Island, didn't directly remake King Kong the same way that Peter Jackson and other directors in the 1970s had remade the original King Kong before. Instead, he took the character of Kong, put him in a fairly new setting, even though it's technically Skull Island, and gave the story a really fresh coat of paint. Everything felt completely new, but also familiar in a way that previous remakes really hadn't done before. And for that reason, I think that he will probably do the same for Gundam. The producer, Kale Boyter, who was responsible for Detective Pikachu, did the same with Detective Pikachu. It's technically set within the universe of the Pokemon games, but in a unique city and with a unique storyline and also unique characters. So while you could technically say that it fits in with the rest of the story, in fact there's a reference to the first Pokemon movie that's very subtle in Detective Pikachu, it's more or less its own creature, and that's, again, for the benefit of the film. I believe that's the approach that they're probably going to take to this new adaptation. Some kind of compromise between setting it in the same universe as the original, or using some of the same elements, for example the setting, but changing things enough that new fans will also be able to use it as an entry point, but old fans won't feel completely alienated. There are a few things that I'm worried about in terms of this adaptation. One of them is budget. It's going to cost a lot of money to turn Gundam into a live-action film, and I'm hoping that Netflix can secure enough funding that this is a possibility. Another worry of mine is that they bite off more than they can chew. If they feel like this is the only chance they'll get to adapt Gundam into live action, they might try to adapt every single Gundam story into one film, which will leave the movie bloaty and unwatchable. They need to keep this grounded and short form. I think that the film should be no more than maybe 90 minutes, and I know that's crazy to say in a world where there's movies that are 4.5 hours long, like Batman v Superman, but I think that the style of Gundam, especially if we're going to go Universal Century arc route, should keep it short and sweet and just introduce some of the characters and some of the key fights, and maybe leave it on a cliffhanger open for some sequels in the future. With all that said, I think that the people behind the production of this Gundam live action movie are some really creative people who could take the Gundam series and adapt it into something really exciting and interesting for the big screen, or at least the streaming screen. I'm genuinely excited to see how this is going to turn out, and even if it's a complete mess, I'll probably still like it. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and have a great day. See ya.